Well, now that Trump has made his statement at the WEF, his position and his intentions are much more clear, and they are actually much more concerning than what the Liberal government thinks they are. Welcome to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. I'm your host. President Donald Trump made an appearance at the WEF. He did it over a video conference or a video call, or I don't know what program they use. Let's call it Zoom. And he was speaking to a room full of businessmen. And what I enjoyed most about the speech is that as they were all listening to every word that he has to say, as they were all gobbling up his every nuance, his every subtlety, he was telling them how he doesn't feel that they have any importance in the world anymore. And every plan that they are making is going to be torn asunder by his moves and his actions. I'm not sure that they saw it as he was saying it, but I'm telling you that that's what it was heard. Now, how did that impact Canada? How did that going to, why are we talking about this and how it's going to affect Canada? Well, when I couple it with some of the other moves that he's making, when I couple it with the threat of tariffs, rather than many of you know, rather than being hysterical or dramatic or overreact on this channel, we like to think our way through things. I feel that I have enough information to think my way through this, and the problem is much worse than tariffs. So let me open with a couple of snippets. It was a 45-minute interaction, 20 minutes he spoke, and then there was a lot of questions that were asked by these various billionaires that were up on the stage. A lot of theater in it, of course. But what Trump had to say is relevant, and I want you to hear just a snapshot of some of the things that he said, which are a massive deviation from what you're hearing.
They say that there's light shining all over the world since the election. It was just announced that small business optimism skyrocketed by 41 points in a single month. That's the highest ever. There's never been anything like that. America is back and open for business.
Shining light all over the world, small business optimism. He's saying this to a room full of people in the WEF. It was excellent. I mean, they're sitting there nodding and they're doing whatever it is that they were doing. However, what he's really saying is that the small guy, the middle class, sees for the first time a chance to try and get out from under the boot heel of most of the world is underneath. And this room full of bankers and investors are sitting there thinking, well, what about the last 10 years, 20 years we've just spent trying to turn the whole world into, the dark ages where we only had two classes of people before we had a middle class. We had the super rich and we have the super poor. What the economy that looks like in most of the world. Okay, a couple other clues, hints, indications of where he's actually headed versus what the far left is trying to terrify you with.
Deployed active duty U.S. military and National Guard troops to the border to assist in repelling the invasion. It was really an invasion. We will not allow our territory to be violated. And it's also reported today in the papers that Saudi Arabia will be investing at least $600 billion in America, but I'll be asking the Crown Prince, who's a fantastic guy, to round it out to around $1 trillion. I think they'll do that because we've been very good to them.
First, let me say that he wasn't inaugurated very long before he signed a executive order labeling all Mexican drug cartels as terrorist organizations and then dropped 1,500 troops along the border. That number is set to increase. And the people that look after that keep track of all the terrorist organizations in the world, like that the United States keeps track of, are now going to get to turn their drones and their spies and everything else that they got. I don't know what they got, but they got stuff, satellites, onto the lives and organizations of the Mexican cartels. So they're about to have a lot of hard time down there. And then he says, oh, look, I got the guy from Saudi Arabia to promise to spend $600 billion. Now, I looked into that a little bit. It turns out that Saudi Arabia, a country that just sits essentially on a beach that's just sand everywhere, has a gross domestic product of $1.1 trillion. That's the kind of money that oil generates. That's the kind of money that fuel generates. And he says, well, we're going to get them to invest $600 billion in America. Don't go thinking in your mind that they're going to be opening up, whatever it is, some kind of business. $600 billion, that's jets, that's guns, that's bullets, that's drones, that's military infrastructure that he undoubtedly hammered out to get them to force Hamas to sign the treaty with Israel. That's what that is. That's guns. Lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of them. What they do with them, I have no idea. But I know you're not spending $600 billion on alfalfa farms. You're buying stuff that you can use to defend your country with. That's important because Saudi Arabia has oil, Canada has oil, and Saudi Arabia is buying $600 billion worth of military. Canada has 14 guys with slingshots who are hoping that they don't get attacked by a country like Saudi Arabia. Okay, here's what he said about Canada specifically.
Canada, we have a tremendous deficit with Canada. We're not going to have that anymore. We can't do it. I don't know if it's good for them. As you probably know, I say you can always become a state. And if you're a state, we won't have a deficit. We won't have to tariff you, et cetera, et cetera. But Canada has been very tough to deal with over the years. And it's not fair that we should have a $200 billion or $250 billion deficit. We don't need them to make our cars, and they make a lot of them. We don't need their lumber because we have our own forests, et cetera, et cetera. We don't need their oil and gas. We have more than anybody. And we just want to be treated fairly with other nations. They've allowed other nations to take advantage of the U.S., and we can't allow that to happen anymore. We have debt.
Well, you heard that. He has $250 billion deficit with Canada. That's the kind of money that minerals and oil generate, people. Think about that. For some reason, the Liberal government and the NDP and Mark Carney decided that we shouldn't build a pipeline east or west, that we should leave ourselves in such a vulnerable position that we had only one customer that we can reach. Now, he said, the countries are taking advantage of us and I don't like it. He made another crack about the 51st state. And now I can tell you why he said it, because if he becomes the 51st state, they don't owe us that money. That's what he figures. There's no deficit. It doesn't benefit you and I, Canadians, at all. He didn't mention critical minerals either, but that generates a lot of money, and he left that off there. They do have quite an amount of lumber. We've been in a softwood tariff. We've been in a softwood lumber argument with them since the 80s, so that's nothing new. We have a lot of oil that we give them. That's where the bulk of the deficit is. Of course, there are things that we could do as Canadians to offset that deficit, but it would, first of all, require that we had a functioning government. I'll get into that in a second. I would like to draw more attention to the fact that he said we can't be owing people like that. We can't be owing countries money like that. We've had enough of that. And then he went on to say in other times that the policies of the far left have made Americans vulnerable and weak and broke. And none of what he said there sounded very bully-ish to me. He didn't sound like a bully at all, as a matter of fact. He sounded like a person who was like, you know what, I've had enough of you taking advantage of me, and I'm putting my foot down. I'm not doing it anymore. However, the far left needs to say words like bully so that it triggers their base. I hope that people out there that are in their base and listening to me right now understand that you need to think your way through your vote. It's not like picking an ice cream flavor. It's important, and it will impact every single facet of your life. However, what I really want to bring home is some of the things that I left to the end, because it's in these next 4 or 5 clips that you can understand exactly where he's coming from and why I tell you the tariff means nothing, but what he's about to say is a big, massive, humongous, enormous problem for Canadians.
To further unleash our economy, our majorities in the House and Senate, which we also took along with the presidency, are going to pass the largest tax cut in American history, including massive tax cuts for workers and family, and big tax cuts for domestic producers and manufacturers. My message to every business in the world is very simple. Come make your product in America, and we will give you among the lowest taxes of any nation on earth. But if you don't make your product in America, which is your prerogative, then very simply, you will have to pay a tariff. Under the Trump administration, there will be no better place on earth to create jobs, build factories, or grow a company than right here in the good old USA.
Well, that is a problem for Canada right there, what he just described. I left the clip out where he talked about that he's going to be getting the federal taxes down to about 15%, which would probably be the lowest on earth, except for some, underdeveloped countries, but it certainly will be the lowest in the Western world, in the developed hemisphere. 15%. When you got companies up here paying through their nose just to get started, they got regulations and red tape coming out their wazoo, and then they end up paying 35, 40%. However, the real problem, the real concern is the capital gains tax that the Liberals initiated in their lack of understanding of the economy. Because see, Trump just said to the world, come and open your businesses here. Well, any company in Canada right now is going to themselves, 15%, I can rent and I can drive 50 kilometers. I can drive 100 kilometers. I mean, most of the country lives along the bottom 5% of the country. Most of the people in our country, population, live along the bottom 5% of the country. And they can start the company over there for next to nothing and simply drive the product back to Canada and giving the jobs down to America. Why wouldn't they? The tax regime is going to be enormously better, so much better. Of course, Canada can't do anything about it because we have a government that is more worried about themselves than they are about Canadians. Justin Trudeau resigned. That doesn't mean that we have to wait for them to pick a new leader before we can run for a political election. This is Canada, not the United States. Nobody voted for Justin Trudeau. You can see that, by the way, that the second he goes to resign, they're going to put in a new prime minister. So he could call an election. He doesn't have to run. And the Liberals and the Conservatives and the NDP and all the rest of them can run. And then if the Liberals, for whatever reason, win, they can pick a new prime minister out of the people that they got in their seats. Because it doesn't matter. It's the leader of the party. It's not like voting for Biden or Trump. Nobody voted for Trudeau except for the people in his Mount Royal riding of Montreal. I think that's where he is. But anyway, he's on the island. I know that. But they don't want that, right? Because they know that would put them out of power. But they don't care what's going to happen to me and you. I mean, it's no wonder they're all freaking out. This move here is going to pull so much industry out of Canada. But worse, it's going to pull out all of the things we lack because of that stupid capital gains tax. That capital gains tax impacts plumbers, farmers, fishermen, dentists, doctors. You seeing a theme here? There are people quite literally who do nothing but, own 2 vans who could simply drive down to the United States and become an electrician down there and only pay 15% tax. That's a problem. Not for them. That's great for them. It's bad for me and you because it's going to create a drain, a trade and a skill drain. And who can blame them? Who can blame them? The country that we live in is taxing Canadians to death. They're taxing Canadians to oblivion. They're taxing Canadians right out of the middle class and into the poorhouse. They're doing nothing proper with the money. They're wasting every nickel, throwing it away in Yugoslavia Ukraine and all kinds of other places that don't impact or help or assist Canadians in any way, shape, or form. We're spending billions of dollars on apps that don't work. We're throwing money away for green slush funds. They're just throwing this money away, borrowing every step of the way, more and more deficit from guys like Mark Carney who now want to run the country because they don't want to get out of the way, because they don't want to say it's better for Canada if we just hold an election now and we'll worry about the leadership race later. No, 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 no. They want to stall. They want to delay. They want to make executive orders, and they want to run around on their with their salary and their jets and all of their write-offs. They want to live high on the hog off the Canadian taxpayer. Trump, on the other hand, is like, hey, if you want to start a business here, I am going to give you the greatest tax rates in the history of the world. And the country, the economy in the United States of America is about to explode in heretofore unknown scales. I mean, it's going to make Hiroshima and Nagasaki look like little firecrackers. Because it won't just be Canada, but Canada is the number one place that these businesses are going to be able to zip across the border. It won't take them anything. Most of them are paying too much for rent anyway. I mean, imagine in your mind how many people are going to go down there, start a business, and he'll say, yeah, no problem. We will give you low taxes, because that's what he's imagining in his mind when he says it. He's imagining having so much business, the Walmart model of business, where you don't charge a lot for your product, but you make your money by selling a lot of it. And the same idea, he's not going to have to charge a lot of taxes because he will have so much of it coming in. And he will then be able to pull back industry from China. He'll be able to pull back industry from Mexico. I mean, I'm surprised Mexico doesn't just say to himself, we're for sale, and just, become part of the American, part of the United States. Honestly. It's a bit disconcerting how badly our liberal government let us down. He went on to say in this speech that he got there was 2 LNG plants in the state of Louisiana that were in arguments with the regulators for nearly 10 years. He got the flip switched on those LNG plants in the state of Louisiana, and that helped Japan. Now, I'm sure Japan was one of the countries that came to Canada and said, hey, look, can we buy some of your LNG? And Trudeau said there was no business sense for it, and then killed the pipeline. We could sail it from northern British Columbia over to Japan, no time at all. And we would have people living up there. We would have pipelines up there, and we would have all those things. They're taking it out of Louisiana, which means that they're going to sail down through the Panama Canal and up to Japan. That's how much money is involved. They're willing to go through those extra lengths. And Canada said there was no business sense for it. The Liberal Party has, this time, I'm not sure it's going to take a little while. And every day that goes by, we don't have a sitting government that can even do anything about it, like call an election so that we can get somebody in that will take care of it, that will look after it, that at least will be able to have a functioning government, to pick up the phone and say, okay, we need to do this, we need to do that. The Liberal Party is in shambles and not very good with their money in the first place. But you can hear there, that's not a man being a bully. That's a man saying, you know what? I'm just going to make whatever money I can make. And if that means that you're not making money off me, I'm okay with that. Of course, we have the governments that we keep selecting have no business sense. So we don't even have an internalized economy. At least if I were, I mentioned Mexico, at least if you went down there are people buying and selling inside of Mexico. We essentially have no manufacturing, no structures, no nothing. We don't even have cross-border trade. It's terrifying to think that the people that are in charge are now more worried about having a leadership election so that they can run out in front and say, look, I'm the head of the Liberal Party. Maybe you should vote for me, when we don't even vote for you except for your independent riding. And they don't care enough to get out of the way. They don't care enough to say, let's have the election now, the federal election now, because that's what's important to Canadians. That's what matters to the lives and of the economy of this country. No. It's all about them. It's all about them. It's all about them. I didn't hear anything from Donald Trump that indicates being a bully. I did hear some very clever, savvy business sentences. Remember, he said this to the WEF. It was a room full of people that understand the economics of the world, that understand all of that stuff. And this was in response to questions. So he said, come on in. I'm going to give you the lowest taxes in the free world, in the Western world. And of course, in the room, the WEF, they didn't realize just how badly it was destroying all of their globalist agenda, because he's removing the globalists. He's saying, come build it here. Donald Trump's probably old enough to remember when that's what it looked like in the 50s and 60s at the end of the Second World War, when the Americans were supplying everything. And then you and I as Canadians will be looking down at products. Instead of it saying made in China, it'll say made in America. Instead of it saying made in Canada. Because we don't have any sitting government, we can't change the rules that we have. We can't lower the carbon, remove the carbon tax. We can't do any of that. All we have is a bunch of petty little backbiters who think to themselves that they are more important than the lives of Canadians, and they do so without ever caring what they're putting us through. I mean, this was a genius move by Trump. And there was one other thing, another kick in our pants that he said that is also going to magnify just how badly the liberal government has led us astray.
I'm also going to ask all NATO nations to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP, which is what it should have been years ago. It was only at 2%, and most nations didn't pay until I came along. I insisted that they pay, and they did.
Oh, man. 5%. That is going to, I mean, we can't get the liberal government to make 1%. I think to get to 2%, they have like a 7-year plan or something like that. I believe it's like 2032. And I'm sure by the time we got halfway there, they would have said that there's some other reason that they can't meet that target. Now, we need to be meeting that target. We, as a country, need to be starting to take care of ourselves. And the first thing that we have to do, of course, is get the government out of the way so that we can hire the right people. We don't have a culture for warriors right now. We have a culture for tattletales and people who are running around being super duper sensitive over whether or not somebody, spoke to them harshly or something like, whatever the sensitivity training tells them that they have to do. That has to go, because nobody wants to be policed like that. Nobody. And the fact that you have done that and saw the numbers of the military drop tells you that nobody wants to do it. Doesn't matter what you want. It matters what the people want. And the people want a strong, secure country. You can't get there with sparkly socks. You have to get there with determination, and you have to get there with thinking your way through this problem. Catching up to 5% GDP shouldn't be that much difficulty if we simply change the culture to the fact where we're allowing ourselves to build weapons. Canadians have often built some pretty spectacular weapons. And then because our government does nothing, we take them down. We sell the plans to the Americans. The guy who designed it gets a job with the manufacturing or with the munitions company. And the Americans turn around and sell, millions of copies to other countries. But we don't have a sitting government that we can even remove to change the culture. And we have to make it a warrior culture. 5% is a lot of money, but we can't get there with I think our CAF is at like 40% staffed. Not to mention that the ones that are staffed there are so afraid to put a toe out of line by just saying one sentence. I mean, the people that are looking after it have clearly never spent any time in combat or with actual soldiers. They go to their I don't know what training it is, and then they come back and say, hey, you can't raise your voice like that. I don't appreciate your tone, and all kinds of stupidness that doesn't belong on the front line, that doesn't belong in the mindset or the mentality of a person who is literally could come in any moment to have to defend the nation with their very life. And for some reason, you think that you should make it more tender and gentle. It's not a tender and gentle world. It's not a tender and gentle position. It's not a tender and gentle job. Oh, certainly those men have that ability to be tender and gentle with their families, with their children, but not in a combat zone. But no, it doesn't work like that. Strength, determination, those are the things that you need to put forward. Honor, dignity, these are the words that you need to put forward. You can take one or two bad examples and try to turn it into anything you want to, but none of that is going to achieve the 5%. And he won't wait long before he puts his foot down on that 5%. We have to have a plan in place. Of course, we can't get a plan in place because we do not have a functioning federal government. And the federal government that we currently have killed themselves trying to get to 2% in the next 7 years. So they don't have a plan. They hire people that tell you you're not allowed to raise your voice. these two things are far worse than any tariffs that Trump may be talking about. He doesn't need tariffs. He's just going to simply give all of our tradesmen decent tax rates, and that'll be the end of the what little economy we do have. And the liberals will be running around saying, oh, look, it's not our fault. It's all somebody else's fault. You need to, if you're, in the Liberal Party right now and you're listening to this, you need to stop what you're doing. You need to call an election, and you can worry about your leadership roles later. Because there's nobody in the front bench of the Liberal Party that can understand what they're up against when it comes to this Trump approach. Not one of you. I mean, you're either too sensitive or you're too ignorant. I don't know which one it is, and I don't really care. I know that you are not capable of withstanding it. And most of the country wants an opportunity to pick somebody who they believe will be able to withstand it. All right, I'm going to wrap here. I'm going to thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.